author of the awesome book, UX for Lean Startups, and popular design blog, Users Know. She's currently an advisor to several small startups and consults with companies that want to improve their research, UX, and product development processes. She's also working on her second book, Build Better Products. I really want to thank Laura for being here with us today. Please welcome Laura Klein.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Let me get this set up. How about this one? I'm going to keep this short so we can all get to the munchies, because frankly, that sounds a lot more appealing than talking about this for me. So thank you again for coming. I really appreciate it. I'm Laura. And today I want to talk about data, actually, and I want to talk about how we can use data, both qualitative and quantitative, to build better stuff for people. But okay, I'm going to take a little poll. Who's a little tired of hearing about data? Hands high. Yep. Yeah. It feels like you can't really leave the house without running into a data scientist these days, or can't go and get coffee at Starbucks without, Phil's, without hearing somebody talk about, oh, we're A/B testing. Oh, look, we're doing funnel analysis. Oh, we're doing cohorts. Blah blah blah. Sorry, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, and it's important. I'm talking about data today because better data can help us build better products. Sometimes. Not if we use them wrong. So the fact is that badly collected qualitative and quantitative research actually hurts product development. And believe me, there are some folks out there who are doing just some absolutely horrific things with numbers, with analytics, with metrics. They are making terrible decisions based on what they think is science. And that's unfortunate, because if you use it well, you make much better decisions. So let's look at a couple of ways to do it right. So before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what data can't do. Data can't replace design. It just doesn't. This whole idea that we can sort of throw a bunch of things out into the wild and A/B test them and just A/B test our way to a better product without ever doing any kind of actual research on our users, that's nonsense. It turns out that if you A/B test two crappy things, you end up with the best crappy thing. So metrics don't replace designers, which is good for people like me. Metrics enhance designers, which, as it turns out, is also good for people like me, so you may be getting a little bias here. So quantitative research also doesn't replace listening to users. I don't say talking to users here, I say listening to users. Really understanding what your users are doing. You can't replace that with just metrics. Again, metrics are great for helping you learn more about it, but it doesn't replace it. It also doesn't tell us what we should be building. Turns out that's our job. We have to figure out what we should be building. It just tells us what our users are doing. Can do some great things. Can inform your design, can inform your research. It can make your research a lot better because it can tell you places that you need more qualitative information. We'll talk about that in a second. And it should tell us more about what we should be looking into, what we should be investigating. We can use it as a jumping off point for learning more about our users qualitatively, and we can use it to confirm or invalidate a lot of our assumptions. And that is enough high-level blather for me. Let's jump in and actually look at an example. So I want you to imagine a funnel. It's my artist representation of a funnel. I'm a designer, not an artist. Specifically, I want you to imagine a checkout funnel. We're going to come with me on this imaginary journey. Let's say that you have a software as a service business, and you have an actual business with actual users, yay, and you're selling them something, and to actually sell them something, they have to go through some steps to buy the thing that you're selling them, your service. To be clear, I am not saying that these are the correct steps. I think one could make an excellent argument that there are way too many steps here. However, these are the steps for this example because I wanted a lot of them. So they may not be in this order, but this is what you're putting your users through. Now, this is one of the reasons why I don't like to call these funnels. Anyone guess why? Let's define funnel. With funnels, you pour things into the top and it all comes out the bottom in the same place. That's what funnels are. This is a sieve. That is not a funnel. That is, if it's a funnel, it's a terrible funnel. This was named by somebody who didn't know what funnels were. So everybody's sort of on the same page, what's happening here is 100% of the people who are going into my checkout flow, 100% of the people have said, like, they've clicked on a button that says, buy now or get this plan or whatever, right? They've clicked on that button and they've entered the funnel, and then they start dropping off. Some of them, like, you lose 20% at create account, then of those people, you lose 10%, then you might lose 50%. These numbers are entirely made up, but they're based on a lot of actual funnels that I have seen that have similar numbers to this. Here they are actually translated into numbers, and I'm begging you not to check my math. It's close enough. But what this is showing you is that of every 100 people that you put in to the top of that funnel, you're pouring into the top of that funnel, 18 come out the bottom as users. And that is horrible. That is not good. That means that 100 people have shown an intent to buy, and you're only collecting money from 18 of them. It's actually not bad compared to some funnels I've seen, but it ain't great. It's not what you want. So, and the fact is that each one of those 100 people that you poured in the top cost you something, right? Cost you money in Google ads or time. Your time has value, right? Your time is not free. So to acquire 100 people who are interested in your product and only collect money from 18 of them, that's costing you a lot of money. Now, if we look at the funnel, we can see that some of the steps are less good than others. Some of the places we're losing more users than others. Specifically, that payment info screen looks pretty terrible. It's an obvious friction point. It's what we call a friction point. Does anybody have any guesses why that's a friction point? Just based entirely on this number, do people have? Oh, I love it. You guys have all sorts of ideas. This is good. It's also a trap. Stop thinking of reasons why that payment screen is terrible. Here's why. You have no idea why that payment screen is terrible. It might be terrible because it's not loading for half of the users who hit it. It might be terrible because you're asking for some horrible information. It might be terrible for any one of 1,000 different reasons that I've seen it be terrible in the past, but you cannot create a reasonable hypothesis about why this particular payment screen is terrible until you have some context. But I see this over and over. I see teams, and I'm sorry, I put you guys into a bad position where I basically forced you to give me reasons. And all of your reasons are probably reasonable. Like, they're probably things that you've seen in the past, and I get it. It's really tempting to go, oh my God, nobody's making it past the payment screen. It must be this thing that I saw. It must be this pattern that I identify. That's a problem because the data don't tell us anything at all about why something happened. Data can help us understand the friction point, but only if you understand this, that there are two things that you need to do when you come to a friction point. You need to explain it, and you need to know what's happening, and then you need to explain why it's happening. And to do that, you need both quantitative and qualitative data. Quantitative data, that's the metrics, that's the, look, we're losing 50% of our people at this step. It's telling us what is happening. Qualitative, talking to people, watching people, observing people, listening to people. That will tell us why. That is the only thing that can give us good reasons why. So, if quant is what and qual is why, and by the way, that previous slide is in, I think, every single one of my decks because it is so critical to understanding all kinds of user research. How does it work in the real world? How do we use them together to actually build better products? So we're going to walk through an actual way that it might work. So the first step in any kind of research, or in this kind of research, when we're going through this pattern, is I want you to identify where your biggest problem is. So, I mean, there's no reason to spend a lot of time optimizing something that is 99% perfect, right? Let's find something that's pretty messed up and fix it. So as we saw earlier, friction point, we're gonna use the funnel metrics to identify that friction point. Not the only kind of metrics you can use, dozens of others, all right? But that's the one we're gonna use in this example. You might remember our hated payment info screen. That is, of course, quantitative data. The next step, though, is to understand why. And to do that, for this particular instance, I would recommend doing something like an observational usability study. Does anybody know what those are? Anybody done strict observational? Not necessarily task-based, but strict observational. This is where I always get a few people who actually know. Observational usability is, it's a little something that I like to call watching your users use your product. That's really all it is. But it's phenomenal for understanding why things are happening. All you really do is you get a few people. Okay, you get 4 to 6 people in, because that's the right number for this kind of usability study for reasons I'm totally not going into right now. But you get 4 to 6 people to go through that particular flow, to go through that particular funnel in your product, and you observe them, and you start looking for, okay, where do they break down? Where are they having problems? What are their issues? You want to pay particular attention to the payment info screen in this particular case. This is qualitative research. This is like the standard. This is like the gold standard of qualitative research. This is the kind of qualitative research that, like, if you're going to do anything, like if you're going to do one kind of qualitative research, do this. Watch people. Look at what you're inflicting on your users. Watch people use your product. So based on your observation between 4 and 6 people, as I said, because that's the correct number, you might come up with these sorts of observations. And probably you guys were shouting some of these out, and you were probably right. But these, this is based on a lot of research that I've done in the past. And so let's say that you come up with these kinds of observations. Maybe people didn't have their payment info handy. Maybe they were confused by a specific question. Look for a promo code. That's my favorite one, when people just wander off into the distance because you've put a little button on there enticing people with a coupon that they're like off at Retail Me Not trying to find the damn coupon. Yeah. Also, just as a little side note, I actually like, when I conduct these studies, when I'm presenting the deliverables, I will actually create the funnel, and I will put the number of people that we lost with the reasons that we lost them at that point. Sometimes I put little pictures of people jumping out of the funnel. It's very evocative. It's sort of helpful, but it's helpful as, it's sort of a joke, but it's helpful as a communication tool to show the rest of your team, hey, people failed in these ways at this step. And this is the actual impact that it's having on our numbers. That's a very persuasive qualitative research argument, by the way. So once you've figured out your possible user problems, you need to figure out if fixing those problems for users is actually going to solve a business problem that you have, which is that you're losing this huge percentage of people. It could be that each of these problems is affecting your metrics equally negatively. Totally possible. Every single one of them, you saw 3 problems, and each one of them is causing exactly 1/3 of the damage, except that never happens. Or maybe it's something else entirely that you weren't actually able to observe. Whatever it is, you need to figure it out by coming up with some possible solutions, and then testing them in the smallest possible way and seeing if they improve your funnel, obviously. So my first step in making a product change is to create what we call solution hypotheses, which is a horrible name, and I would love it if somebody would come up with a better one. The reason I come up with a solution hypothesis is that if I'm going to test to see if this change was successful, I have to know what both success and failure look like. All right? If there's more than one way to solve a problem, and there almost always is, remember, one user can have multiple problems, one problem can have multiple solutions, then I like to list all of the thing that I think is going to happen and all of the possible negative consequences that could actually happen. So let's walk through that. We're going to say that the solution hypothesis, we're going to say the problem was this promo code thing. People looked at the promo code, they just left. Not saying this is definitely the problem that was causing it. We're saying that we're choosing this one to test. Easy solution, get rid of it, right? Simple. Doesn't seem hard. I see a lot of research results like this from people sometimes who aren't necessarily designers. Where like, this box was confusing to people. The solution is to get rid of this box, which is a reasonable thing to suggest. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. However, what we should say is, we think that by removing this box, what's going to happen is we are going to see an increase in conversion to paid. We're going to see more people moving past that specific screen. It actually doesn't matter if you just get an increase in conversion. What matters is, did you get people one step further? All right? And now, okay, what often happens here is that people see this and they go, oh, yeah, totally. I read this in a blog post that that's totally the problem. And they're like, yeah, let's just do that. Let's get rid of the box. Ship it. Problem solved. And then they move on with their lives and never test again. Except, we should probably look at what could possibly go wrong. Because one of the things that we use metrics for is to figure out if we've actually caused damage. And it's good to know what kind of damage we're looking for. So for example, that promo code was there for a reason, I guess, right? Unless that reason was like, well, everybody else has them, but, which sometimes happens. But, maybe this hurts our acquisition if we get rid of the promo code. Maybe we lose, that 20% of the users who are super price sensitive and are just on the cusp. Maybe we lose the ability to reward special customers. We need to know what possible harm we're causing, and we need to write that down in our solution hypothesis. All right, so we've decided what problem we're going to try to fix. We've come up with what we think is going to happen if we fix it. We've come up with a way that we think we could fix it, and we've come up with the possible downsides. Now, remember that nothing that I'm predicting here is true. It's all just assumptions and hypotheses and things that I'm making up to test, which is what brings us to step 4, which is learn and iterate. And this is the most important step. Because without learning and iterating, again, we're just flinging products out into the void and then going merrily on our way without really knowing whether or not we've made improvements. And we can't get better if we're not seeing if the things that we did improved things. So for this step, we're going to use, actually, we're going to go back, we are actually going to learn and iterate with both qualitative and quantitative data, because I am sort of obsessed with this. In order to learn, we need to come up with a test for the solution hypothesis. How could we possibly figure out if removing the box is a good idea? We need some quantitative testing method, probably an A/B test if we have enough users, right? I would say if you have enough traffic, you have to A/B test things like this. That's the rule. If you don't have enough traffic, you can do another observational usability study, but you really want to have you want to at least look at your funnel metrics for quantitative data to understand whether your metrics improved with this change. Very quantitative way of looking at it. Now let's say that it came out well. Look, we're no longer losing 36 people there, we're losing 10 people there. Well, that's fantastic. Means changes improved things overall. Yay! But it's not enough just to know that we're right. We have to know why we were right. We can do this again by reperforming that qualitative research. I always give this as the example for finding out why we were right, but really, when we use this the most is to figure out why we were wrong, which also happens, even to me. Sometimes, you do all this research, you do all this qualitative research, you have a great solution hypothesis, you ship it, and nothing happens, or it gets worse. It just happens. You do qualitative research in order to understand what the hell happened. Very important. And if we were wrong, we do it again. But we come up with a different solution hypothesis. And we ship it and we test it again and see if we got it better. Sometimes, if we were a little right, we might still do it again. It's very important before you go into any of this to have a very clear idea, like I said, of what success means to you. Success doesn't mean necessarily a little better, right? There's some number that you have to hit in order to make payroll, theoretically, or get your next round of funding, or whatever number it is that matters to you. There is a number that you have to hit, and you have to keep iterating until you hit that number. So make sure that you know ahead of time not how many times you're going to iterate, but what number you're going to iterate until. So, came up with another possible solution. You would go through that same process and test that one. And, when we do hit the number, when we're like, yeah, great, we're losing 4 people on that page, that's good. That was the number we were trying to hit, 4, the secret number that was in my head that I didn't tell you about. Then we do it again in a different step. And we keep doing that until we have optimized our entire checkout funnel, or whatever funnel it is that we're working on. So that is a process for combining qualitative and quantitative data. It is not, it will not surprise you to hear, the only process for doing it. For example, you can do a totally different combination of qual and quant. Let's go through that one. We're going to start a little differently this time. We're still going to identify the biggest problem, but this time we're going to do it with qualitative. We are actually going to identify the biggest problem by interviewing our users. You could start with usability test again. That's a perfectly reasonable way to generate these kinds of qualitative insights that give us, ideas about what problems we're causing for our customers. Or you could do, like I said, some customer interviews with current customers. You could find out what problems they're having, what things they wish they could do that they can't currently do. You're not just going to ask them what they want and then go build it, right? We all know that's bad. Okay, just checking. That's not research. So let's say that we interview some former users and we find out that they signed up for our software, but then they had problems because they couldn't use it for work because it wasn't secure enough, right? Some plausible reason that somebody couldn't use a software as a service product. So they had to cancel. Great. So we started out the why. Now we have to understand the what. That's step 2. In this case, we are going to try to predict how fixing that problem would actually affect our metrics. Now remember how in the first walkthrough, which was like 15 seconds ago, so if you've forgotten it by now, that's a problem. But we started with the metrics, we moved to the qual, the why, and we're doing the opposite here. And in this example, we want to use the metrics to understand what could possibly happen. And there's a really good reason for this. You see, these metrics that we're looking at aren't necessarily funnel metrics. Instead, we might want to look at something like how many people upgraded to the professional plan, right? We need to predict what metric would actually change if we fixed the problem that the user has. Now, at this point, qualitative researchers look at me in absolute astonishment and say, why? User's got a problem. We should fix the problem. It's bad, right? Well, if you work in a resource-constrained environment, you sometimes have to make choices about what you're going to fix for people. I would also love to fix every single problem that all of my users have ever had. That would be lovely. And also, P.S., I would like somebody to do that for me. That would be great. But realistically, we have to have some way of prioritizing the kinds of things that we see in qualitative research that we're actually going to fix. And a really good way to do that is to figure out what would improve if I fixed it. Because if we're looking at something, if we're looking at, oh my God, we're causing this horrible pain for these users, it's really, they're struggling with it, it's terrible. Okay, well, what metric's that going to change? Oh, well, it's going to really improve our retention. Well, how's our retention? We're retaining 99% of our users. Problem probably isn't that bad. Or it's very possible that we have another problem that's worse than that we could fix instead. This is a prioritization question. We can use the quantitative prediction that we've made to decide whether or not we're actually going to fix, a legitimate problem that we saw people have. Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't eventually try to fix all of the problems that our customers could probably have. I'm just saying that they might have a lot of them, and we have to figure out what to fix first, right? By the way, for anybody who doesn't work in a resource-constrained environment, you should talk to me afterwards because I have always wanted to work in a place where money was no object. Step 3, of course, is exactly the same. You create your solution hypotheses. I don't want to go through that. you come up with different designs, and you come up with, how you think what's going to happen, what you think is going to happen, what could possibly go wrong, and then you figure out a way to test it. And we're not going to go through that whole thing again because, like I said, there are munchies. But seriously, I'm having a really hard time not just focusing on that. I haven't had dinner. Yeah, this looks pretty good. But combining qualitative and quantitative, works for other things that aren't just products, right? You can do your sales pipeline this way, right? You can look at your sales pipeline as a funnel. You can interview people who said no to your sales pitch to understand why they said no. Then you can create solution hypotheses and test them and see if your sales pipeline improves. Anything that's sort of a multi-step process works great for using the funnel metrics and the interview technique. The trick is, step 4 is always, let's all say it together, learn and iterate. Thank you, God, I love that. Share and enjoy. Just the slide again because I love it so much. However you are combining things, whatever you're doing, because I want you to go out and I want you to think of ways that I haven't put up here, ways that I haven't thought of, ways that I haven't used. I want you to think about what quantitative measurements I can use to really understand what is going on in my product. And I want you to then use qualitative research to understand the why. Or I want you to do it the other way around. And I want you to learn and iterate. And I promise you that if you do this, promise you, money back guaranteed. If you do this, if you collect better data, your product will get better. I'm going to answer questions now. A bunch of people sent me questions, and I appreciate that, and I did not look at any of them. So you will ask them again in public, and it'll be like public speaking. But I do want to tell you that if you're interested in stuff like this, I am teaching a class that is much longer, and I probably won't be as sleepy or as hungry. Well, who knows? It's going to be online. It's through O'Reilly Media. It is on September 15th, and it is called UX Design for Growth, and we will talk about, there will be a small bit on funnels. There will also be lots of stuff about ideal customers and user acquisition and the 4 engines of growth, and I don't want to ruin it for you. Just come and sign up for the class. It'll be fantastic. Just the slide again because I love it so much. However you are combining things, whatever you're doing, because I want you to go out and I want you to think of ways that I haven't put up here, ways that I haven't thought of, ways that I haven't used. I want you to think about what quantitative measurements I can use to really understand what is going on in my product. And I want you to then use qualitative research to understand the why. Or I want you to do it the other way around. And I want you to learn and iterate. And I promise you that if you do this, promise you, money back guaranteed. If you do this, if you collect better data, your product will get better. I'm going to answer questions now. A bunch of people sent me questions, and I appreciate that, and I did not look at any of them. So you will ask them again in public, and it'll be like public speaking. But I do want to tell you that if you're interested in stuff like this, I am teaching a class that is much longer, and I probably won't be as sleepy or as hungry. Well, who knows? It's going to be online. It's through O'Reilly Media. It is on September 15th, and it is called UX Design for Growth, and we will talk about, there will be a small bit on funnels. There will also be lots of stuff about ideal customers and user acquisition and the 4 engines of growth, and I don't want to ruin it for you. Just come and sign up for the class. It'll be fantastic. About any of this or really anything else. Yes, in the back. How many people do you need to talk to in order to call your study valid? Are we talking qualitative research? Yeah, okay. So if you are doing a task-based usability study, which is a very specific type of usability study, or this observational usability, which is sort of a form of that, you need to talk to 5 people, which is a very specific number. This is not my number, it's Jacob Nielsen's number. Basically, after you talk to about 3 people in a usability study, you start to see diminishing returns. Like you start to see patterns, you start to see the same problems crop up over and over and over. However, You do not need to talk to 5 people and then you are done with research. You need to talk to 5 people, you need to identify your biggest problems, and then you need to, even if you're doing qualitative research, like just if you're doing usability studies, you then should like fix your prototype. Like you can do this whole process sort of in prototypes. You can't really collect the quantitative data as well, but what you can do is you can talk to 5 people, figure out your biggest problems, fix your prototypes, or ship some quick code, see if it fixes it, and then run it again on 5 more people and see if the problem went away, all right? If you're doing user research, and I separate out user research from usability testing. User research is understanding your user. Usability testing is understanding your product. They are different things. One is a human. So if you are doing user research, you generally need to talk to people until you start seeing patterns in problems. If you are not seeing patterns in problems by the time you talk to 5 people, you are talking to the wrong people. So one of the things that I see people do, one of the big mistakes, and I'm sorry, I'm straying away from your question. Hopefully that, like the 5, it's 5, but it's 5 over and over and over again with different 5 every time, which is infinite, I guess. One of the huge mistakes that I see people make when they're doing qualitative research is that they talk to literally anybody. And especially when you're trying to learn about your user, this is deadly. I wrote a blog post called Stop Accosting People in Coffee Shops that I encourage you to read because it goes into this in far more depth than anybody actually needs. But you cannot learn about your user by going and like hijacking people randomly at a Starbucks or Phil's. You just can't do it unless your product is for people who go to Starbucks. All right? So keep that in mind. Again, just read the blog post. That's why I write things down, so I don't have to say them again. But it's very important to understand that you need to interview people until you start to see patterns. And if you're not seeing patterns after 5, you're probably way too broad in the people that you're talking to. You're going to get weird responses from people if you start doing that. Right? Like if you're like, oh, it's the product's for moms, it's for anybody's mom. Like, well, if you talk to like my mom or like somebody who's like a 25-year-old mom and you try to see patterns, you're going to see it's going to take you a while to start to see patterns there. You have to talk to a lot of people. Question? Yes.
How do you balance out the costs of doing the research versus the potential gain?
I love this question. Oh, it's an ROI question. Go on.
I may lose so many potential purchases if they get hung up on the coupon code entry. However, how do I balance that versus how many sales can I gain?
That's interesting. Actually, I actually thought you were asking a slightly different question. Can I answer both? Yes. Okay. Because they're both really good questions. I jumped right to the other one. What I heard originally was, how do you balance the cost of the research, right? Research saves you money. that's it. Yeah. So how do you prove that? Yeah, unfortunately, the way that you prove that is by doing research and having better ideas. It turns out that building shit's really expensive. It's less expensive than it ever has been now, but it's still pretty expensive, right? And it turns out, I have found, engineers do not like building the same thing 6 times because you screwed it up the first 5. They are not amused by that. So it can actually cost you in engineering morale, which, once you piss those guys off, you're screwed. I say this as an ex-engineer. So building things has a cost, and doing a little bit of research, or doing sort of the right amount of research up front, it doesn't have to be a giant 6-month study. You have to understand what you're building. What happens is you're more likely to be right when you do, when you do your A/B test, right? You are way more likely to have your branch win if you've done your research ahead of time. And you're any good at, understanding how humans work. Now, so there's another good question in there, which I have no idea if this is the one you're asking or not. I'm just going to talk. There's another good question there, which is sort of, how do you predict the actual, return on any given solution hypothesis? Like you take the promo code off. How do I know that I'm going to make $100 more for every $50 I lose in the other things? You have to boil it down to what metric each one of those things represents. So if I remove that box, eventually, once I run my test, like let's say that I just did that, let's say I just removed the box, I would be able to measure how many more people made it through the funnel, right, and got to the payment, got to the end of the payment. I would also have to know which other metric I was potentially harming in order to track that, because as I said, it might affect acquisition. So if I know, oh, except that I get 10% fewer people to even look at my funnel, then that's just math, right? That I cannot do on the fly. I apologize for that. But if you know I will get 20% more people through the funnel, but I'll get 10% fewer people into the funnel, you figure out what that means in terms of actual sales, in terms of actual revenue numbers. So it can be a little bit tricky, which is why we do A/B tests, which is why we actually, you want to do the A/B test where you've got your control branch and you have your new branch without the box, and you can actually look at the numbers. This branch generated $100,000 in revenue, and this branch generated $120,000 in revenue. After statistical significance, blah, 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 blah. Branch B wins. So that's why we A/B test, because it's much, much, much harder to figure it out if you don't have the kind of traffic to do an A/B test. Yes, in the back. I don't. I wish I did. Sorry. And you know what? I'm going to throw that open because I would actually love the answer to this. Any tips on testing for A/B testing for mobile apps? I know that you can do it. I know people who have done it. I don't know what they did to do it. Anybody? Anybody doing this?
Well, this isn't strict. I have broad definition, but I know there are online platforms that
Okay.
do mobile A/B testing. Zoom has it.
Oh, okay.
And you can't do, like if you have a website that you have come to,
Uh-huh.
it's exactly the same necessarily, but you can figure out that.
Okay. So there are online tools for online A/B testing. This is for you're talking about like actual production code in apps. Yeah, there's somebody who does, there's a startup here that does that, I'm sure. If there isn't, there should be. There will be next week. No, seriously, I've been waiting on a product that lets you do remote moderated testing on mobile devices. And I was complaining that I could not find anybody who had done this, and I've literally been wanting this for 3 years. And it turns out that a company that I actually advised was like, oh yeah, we're doing that now, which I guess I should have paid attention. Maybe they want to check the advice I've given them over the last, maybe I've just been bitching about that to them, and that's why they did it. Validately, that's the company, just so you know. All right, anyway. Questions? Yes? How do you design behavioral study experiments? Understanding. Yeah. Okay. So that's a big question. How do you design behavioral study experiments? There are several branches of academia that actually sort of go into that. So I am not going to do that topic justice right now. But it depends on what you want to learn. Is really the unfortunate answer. One of the things that you want to do is it's more important to see what users are doing and how they're behaving, and then have them tell you stories about, why they do things and that sort of thing. So like I said, I do a lot of observational usability studies to understand why they're doing what they're doing with my product. I don't do a lot of that's not true. I'll do the early ethnography so that I understand why people do things that they do. God, it's hard. Here, this is what I'm gonna do. Read B.J. Fogg. Read Dan Ariely. Read Amy Jo Kim. And then get back to me. But seriously, it's hard to do, and you're not always sure that you're actually understanding exactly why they're doing things, but sometimes it's more important to you to sort of observe their behavior and then hear them talk about why they're doing what they're doing.
So is there a way of asking, not go via the storytelling path and have a user really tell you and observing a user per se, and actually do it on the back end and measure a few things quantitatively and infer qualitative behavior, or is that
So you're asking if you can just infer user behavior. So you can infer behavior. You can't infer why that behavior happens. Okay? So, and I'll give you the really short version of the story. A customer of mine was doing, this was before they were a customer of mine, they were doing an A/B test, and they really thought branch B should win, and it didn't by kind of a lot. And that's when they came to me, and they were like, we don't understand, we did everything right, like we did user research, we understood, like branch B should have won. It's like, well, have you watched anybody use branch A and branch B? So then they went out and did it. Turned out there was like this really weird bug that happened for about a third of the people that we watched. That was pretty bad, but like kind of subtle, but it was just a horrible, like it just created this horrible experience. But like their first impulse was, well, branch B lost. Get rid of it, right? All this work, all this design work that they'd done, right? It was a bug. Like it was a bug. It was literally, I was like, fix that bug. And then send me a big check. They made me do extra work. God, I have never been so sad that I was charging by the hour. But seriously, like, yeah, fix that. They fixed it, branch B won. Because I could look at it and be like, yeah, you're right, branch B should win. It's better. Sort of obviously. But so that's sort of like a good engineering example of like why, and like they had QA'd it and everything. It only happened on like sort of slow machines, sort of far away from the server, and it was a latency thing. Right. But all sorts of other things, right? Like people will do, they'll buy certain things, or they'll buy certain things in conjunction, and then you talk to them about why, and it's surprising sometimes why they do the things they do. You don't always just want to reinforce their current workflow. Sometimes people are doing something, you're like, oh, that's kind of a weird thing, but I guess they want to do it. No, they don't want to do it. They're doing it because they're working around some other weird thing in your product, or they're using your product for something entirely different than what you imagined. And that's a really good thing to know, because you might want to build something that actually supports their real need and not make them work around it in this weird way. If you just look at what people are doing and then reinforce that, you never get that chance to say, oh, they're doing this thing, but not for the reason I thought. So anyway, I've just seen that happen so often that I'm really hesitant to say, you can just infer behavior. The one exception I'm going to give you is when you do an A/B test on a one variable change, like never qualitatively test like text on a button or like colors, sometimes even to some extent visual design. If you make a one variable change and it's like, here's branch A and here's branch B, and there's exactly one thing that's different about branch A and branch B, you can figure out which one was better based on which one won, generally speaking. I have a blog post on this too. It's like when to use qualitative, when to use quantitative. It's somewhere on the blog. If you send me an email afterwards, I can find it for you. Yes, Sean.
When you're doing a solutions hypothesis, how many metrics is too many metrics to measure? Or are there ever too many?
That's an interesting question. I never like to measure anything that wouldn't affect my behavior if it changed. It's kind of just a good like rule of thumb for any kind of metric. It's, in a way, that's what defines vanity metrics from actual metrics that we care about, actionable metrics. If I wouldn't behave differently if this suddenly dropped or suddenly increased, like if this wouldn't change my behavior, if this wouldn't signal something important to me, why am I measuring it? It's just noise. And there are only so many metrics that you should be tracking at all, because they should all be these actionable metrics. If you look up sort of the definition of actionable metrics, lean analytics has sort of a format for how to figure out if it's actionable or not. That's actually really helpful. So measure whichever ones are actionable and that you think might be affected, and a few that are maybe adjacent to ones that you think might be affected. Yes?
I was thinking because your approach works very well for like a sequential.
For bottles.
But let's imagine, for example, that a user doesn't have a sequence of screens that has to go.
Yeah, it's not a funnel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For example, I don't know, a social network. He can post, he can comment, he can like.
Sure.
And you're expecting him to like more.
Yep.
And then he's suddenly commenting more.
Turns out that's actually easier. That's why I do the funnel. Like, good point. And I should make this clear in the slides. It turns out that that's actually easier than funnel metrics because you don't have to like see the whole sequence of steps. If you really look at it, when we create the solution hypothesis, we're really only looking at that one data point anyway. We're looking at that one, like, this particular action. It's actually really hard to create solution hypotheses for anything other than one particular action anyway. So if you expect it to have more likes, and likes for some reason is an actionable metric for you, although I will have a beer afterwards and debate that with you. But whatever it is, like if there is some metric, or if it's, just straight up revenue. Like they just come, they hit the buy button, or they don't hit the buy button, and that's it. Like you can totally measure that. You can do exactly the same thing. You just don't use the funnel part of it. You just look at the metric itself, and you can look at all of your disparate metrics and say, oh, wow, that one looks bad. The other thing is that you actually can look at your entire customer journey. I do a little bit more of this in the class. You can look at your entire customer journey as a funnel itself. Dave McClure has his R, his pirate metrics, acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, something else. What is acquisition, activation, retention, and referral. Thank you. I never remember referral. I have a slightly different one, but I'm not going to get into that because it doesn't matter. But if you look at the entire customer journey as sort of a funnel, right, and your funnel may not go in that order, referral might come before revenue for some reason, then you can measure sort of how far people get along in your customer journey funnel, and then you can look at what metric represents, activation for you, right? Or you might call it engagement, or you might have an onboarding funnel that is part of your activation or retention. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, I get a little involved with that. Yes.
You probably see great characteristics with great background.
Uh-huh.
That cross ratio may be less than or not.
Uh-huh.
A lot of big companies do that,
Uh-huh.
and that gives poor readability.
Yes.
What do you think about compromising usability? I think a big piece about usability. Compromising usability for being cool or I don't know what it is. What's the reason? It's very hard to read.
I agree. So what about gray text on gray backgrounds? I feel like those are visual. So there is a breed of visual designer who, not all of them, some of them are wonderful. There is a, and I run into them occasionally. They're like, great art cannot be tested. Some designs are just better. And then I like to ask, who is paying your salary? Because design, in my opinion, is generally done for a purpose that is not get other designers to think I'm awesome. Now, I think that the cool factor or the wow factor totally exists, and I think it can absolutely 100% be measured. If your audience loves gray text on a gray background, P.S. they don't, then that should show some boost in numbers. If it's actually close enough, if the hex values are close enough that it's actually impacting usability significantly and people are leaving and they can't read the thing, that should show some difference in your metrics. Visual design can have an enormous impact on actual business metrics, which is why I like to measure that stuff. So anyway, I think that the problem exists in this idea that there is this, like, it's cool or it's better. No, it isn't. Like, it's not that you're sacrificing usability for cool. It's that you might have an audience that really likes that particular color palette so much that the fact that it's slightly less usable doesn't hurt them. So it's not less usable to them. It's more usable to them because they love typography or whatever. Does that make sense? Like I think coolness and wow factor and all of that can be turned into metrics and measured. And if it's not improving your metrics, then don't do it.
One comment that sometimes it comes people who sometimes they don't want the user to really see
Yes. Oh, dark patterns.
accidentally or
Oh yeah. Yeah, dark patterns. Yeah. Yes, those are called dark patterns. There are things in UX with what is it? With great power comes great responsibility. You're welcome. And nobody has more power than UX designers, except everybody. But no, there are things called dark patterns. You can trick people into things. I am against those for 2 reasons. First of all, don't be a jerk. Second of all, honestly, I don't think it's good for long-term profits. I don't think it's actually good for your long-term metrics. I think tricking people is a real good way to get yourself sued. It's a real good way to piss off your users. Like if you are building an actual business, don't build it on the back of dark patterns. Like I mean, if you want to run a Ponzi scheme, run a Ponzi scheme. You know, if you want to defraud a bunch of people, defraud a bunch of people. Like I'm not for it. I don't endorse it. But if you actually want to build a real business, and I hope every single one of you in here wants to build a real business that actually helps customers and does, you know, that like makes a great customer experience, a great user experience, and then that causes people to want to give you their money, like that's how it should go, right? Like make something delicious and people want to buy it from you and eat it. And then eat a lot more of it, because that's been my experience. So, you know, but like, I'm not being tricked into eating it. It's just, yeah. Right, yeah.
You mentioned techniques about identifying a problem and then fixing it using Quant and Qual aspects. Are you going to talk about building new products and designing new products where the problem doesn't exist?
Where the volume doesn't exist? What do you do? Is that what you're asking? Like when you...
How do you define a new product using data?
You don't ask small questions, do you? What programming language should I use? No, I'm not going to talk about that tonight. Sorry. I probably talk about it in other talks, but yeah, that's again that is a. I'm sorry, I'm picking on you, but that is a huge question. Like, yeah, how do you pick new products based on data? Yes, take the class. There's some of that in there. Sorry, anybody have a little question? Something easy for me to answer, and then we'll go snack. No, you guys are like, we're done with you. Oh, what's what? Oh, the font? I have literally no idea. Yeah, we can talk later. All that I know is that every time I say font, apparently I mean typeface, and every time I say typeface, I mean font. That's all I know about fonts. Sorry, I'm not that kind of designer. Yes, we have one more question. Sorry. Oh, wait, no, you haven't gotten asked one yet. Yes. All right. Sorry, a little. Uh-huh. How specific is user retention analysis inside UX? How far is it from? I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry. Uh-huh. So do you so UX, unfortunately, like UX is sort of this umbrella term. This I think is what I'm struggling with. UX is this umbrella term that sort of means the entire user experience. And user experience design is the process of creating everything that the user does and interacts with. So if you're talking about like, can you do research to do customer retention analysis, like you can, there are forms of customer retention analysis that you can combine with qualitative research very effectively. We can talk about that afterwards. If you want to talk about like specific ones like NPS and, you know, those kinds of things, finding product market fit and all that. Yeah, I'm not sure that I think I didn't answer that for you, so come ask me afterwards and I'll be very specific. Yes, one more.
I'll ask you a really simple
Oh, thank God, because you can tell them.
Feel my ignorance in this.
All right.
I'd like you to explain the difference between a UX designer, a visual designer, an interaction designer,
And a unicorn.
yeah,
And a Fabergé egg. Huh. And a product designer. Yes, branding. No. So the problem is that there is no, like, I would love for there to be like this really, really cut and dried answer to the question. The question, which is actually, I love this question. It's like, what's the difference between a UX designer, an interaction designer, a visual designer, a user interface, I don't know, whatever. There's a million of them. I would say that there's no standard difference. Generally, a visual designer is going to care, and any visual designer in the room is going to come up and kick my ass after this, but is going to care more about things like fonts and typefaces, whichever, and color palettes and some layout and like the kinds of things that you might have in like a static, like graphic design, like a poster, you know, those kinds of things. Making things, and I don't want to say beautiful because I think that trivializes it, but making products, you know, evoke certain feelings, or aesthetics. Yes, thank you. Aesthetics is a lovely word. Yes, making products that sort of like make people feel things, and it really is very much the look and feel, right? User experience design is generally used to mean sort of the how it works, right? And that can be anything from like the flow, or like how many screens are in something, or, you know, the main call to action, and it can include copy. Like, unfortunately, it's kind of all of it. User experience designers used to, and by used to I mean like 10 years ago, we used to call ourselves interaction designers. And that was similar, although now interaction designer can mean that they just focus on that and they don't do like any of the surrounding stuff. And product designer now means that they do all of it, and plus they do a little product management stuff. Or sometimes it doesn't. The problem is that there's a huge amount of bleed between these things. What I like to do, I have this thing where I talk about they're not jobs. They're not job titles. There are like 8 or 10 roles that need to happen in product development, including things like user research, visual design, copywriting, user research, usability testing, right? Like there's, I don't know, 10 of them. And they're different roles, and a product team needs somebody who knows how to do each of those roles. And it probably shouldn't be one per role, and it probably shouldn't be one person. But other than that, it could be any mix. Yes? Yeah.
I use the word competencies.
Uh-huh.
And people in my team have different competencies, and every one of them has a core competency.
Yep.
And then other competencies that they're either interested in or have experience in and want to cross.
Yep. So yes, use the word competencies. It's a lovely word. That's a good one. You've got good words today. I'm a little slow today, but no, it's good, right? And then you're kind of talking about like a lot of times you'll see like, oh, there's the T-shaped designer, which means that like they're kind of good at everything, and then they're really good at one thing. Or there's the broken comb, which means that they're pretty good at a few different things. And you can make that with any letter you want. I challenge you to do it with an A. It doesn't work at all. Okay. I'm really, like, if you guys want to talk afterwards, I'll stick around for a little bit, but then I have to go home. So thank you all so much for coming. This was great. Oh, if you have questions for me that I did not get to, Laura@usersknow.com. That is KNOW. Laura@usersknow.com. I do answer every email that I get eventually. So